Live on tape, Work in Progress, a World at Work podcast about work, life, and everything in between. With award-winning radio host Tom Alexander and WorkSpan's Not Safe for Work columnist Charles Epstein. Here are your hosts, Tom and Charles.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Work in Progress. My name is Tom Alexander, and as always, I'm joined by my partner and good friend, Mr. Charles Epstein. Hey, Charles.
Hey, Tom. How's everything?
Yeah, everything is going swimmingly, thanks.
It's good to hear. Good to hear. Down here swimmingly at this time of year is, I think, a very good way of looking at it. The temperature, particularly if you don't have a heated pool right now, is about the time. Anyway, I came across an article about some entrepreneur who is looking to disrupt what it means to dress business casual. My first thought was, why does everyone have to disrupt? Whatever happened to change or improve? I mean, isn't that what Apple did to make them so successful beyond their design aesthetic? It was about making a three-step process, a two-step process, incremental improvements that can make all the difference. My second thought was, what is business casual these days? You used to have business casual Fridays. Now business casual is the norm. So I'm not sure what there is to disrupt.
Yeah, I hear that. Back in the day, business casual meant you were allowed to loosen your tie, right?
Yes.
I think that people traditionally mean, what they mean, I guess, is like khakis and open collar polo shirt for men, and for women, a blazer and slacks and a comfortable pair of shoes. Though even that sounds a little bit formal when people are coming to work in shorts and sandals, full body tattoos, nose rings, the works, right?
Yeah, anything goes. It reminds me of what Scott Kaywood discussed in the pod. He was on several weeks back, how he wanted to create and encourage a work environment where people are free to be themselves, and dressing as he does, which is to say being unconventional in his clothing choices, he is sending that message.
Yeah. Now, maybe we should be calling it Dress Cash 2.0, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Where it's not as much as swapping wingtips for running shoes, but simply wearing whatever expresses who you are. Within reason, of course.
Yes.
I mean, there are days when I want to lounge around in my bathrobe and fuzzy slippers, but if I showed up to an office looking like that, I'd probably want to throw myself out the door.
Yes, I think you'd have a company in helping you in that direction. But
yeah, probably so.
Yeah, it reminds me of the time years ago I went for an interview with a headhunter in slacks with burgundy green and white pinstripes. Don't ask. Which at the time I thought was very tasteful, but the interviewer couldn't stop glaring at my slacks. And at some point I just asked, why is he looking at me like I'm wearing clown pants?
Yeah, and I suppose the bottle of seltzer you pulled from your briefcase didn't help matters either, right?
No, nor the fact, that just before I stormed out of his office, I dumped a bucket of confetti on the guy's head.
Yeah.
So to complete the picture, it reminds me years ago. In fact, I almost know to the day when it was. It was a couple of weeks before the millennium, the millennium celebrations in 2000. I was down here for all of maybe a month. And a group up in North Miami wanted to see me. They wanted to discuss services we could provide and so on and so forth. So I came to their office, and as I'm pulling in, I hear some, loud, sound like music. And they greeted me, and they mentioned that Gloria Estefan's band is rehearsing for their big millennial celebration. I don't remember where they were holding it. And they said, hey, afterwards, if you want to meet Gloria and the band, sure. I said, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm down in South Florida. Gloria Estefan can't get, at the time, any more iconic vis-a-vis South Florida than that. So our session or our conversation ended, and they walked me over to the studio. Unfortunately, Gloria had exited by that time. She was out for lunch, but her husband, who was her manager then, and perhaps still is, came out to greet me.
Yeah, Emilio.
Yeah. He's just like this really cool guy in a beret, a shirt opened down through his sternum, a lot of very expensive looking hardware around his neck, rings, the whole bit. Anyway, so he extended it.
Yeah, you don't need a clothier. You need like a surgeon to get you into that stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or the jaws of life to get you out of it.
Yeah, right.
But in any case, so I extended my hand. He extended his, and he was all of a sudden looking me over, and he goes, I don't remember the last time I saw somebody wearing a suit. And yeah, it was funny. He said it in a fun way, but it was the last time, certainly down here, that I wore a suit. Certainly not a black suit, but actually not a suit. Period. Down here, they take business casual very seriously.
They definitely do. Speedos at a funeral.
Well, maybe go a little bit far.
Well, maybe that
little too far, but I take your point.
Fun show today ahead. We've got some really good guests from Syndio. We have Maria Colacorcio, the CEO, and she'll be speaking to us from Seattle. And Syndio's founder and chief science officer, Zev Eigen, and he's going to be talking to us from Culver City, California. Right. Plus, we have the author of Rampage Nation. It's Dr. Louis Klarevas, and he'll be speaking to us from New York. And we'll be talking a little bit about what it is to be with him, an educator, as he has taught at many, many fine universities around the world, by the way. And of course, the author of Rampage Nation, which talks a lot about the gun problems, not only here in the United States, but everywhere around the globe. So we'll be talking to Lou as well. That's Dr. Louis Klarevas. And we'll be back.
This is Work in Progress.
Joining us today are Maria Colacorcio, CEO at Syndio, and Zev Eigen, Syndio's founder and chief science officer. Syndio enables modern organizations to harness the power of data to solve the most challenging business problems, like closing the gender pay gap, reducing costly unwanted attrition, and improving true engagement and collaboration. Maria joins us from her office in Seattle, and Zev joins us from Culver City, California. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we're happy to be here.
Well, it's great to have you both, and please say hello to my partner, Charles Epstein.
Hello, Charles.
Hey,
hello.
Zev, hey, nice. Thanks so much for joining us today. Culver City and Seattle, two places I wouldn't mind visiting. In Culver City, you get to tour MGM's sound stages, and of course, in Seattle, you can check out Paul Allen's Museum of Pop Culture. I don't know if I had a choice, that would be tough. It's basically between, roaming the sets of Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind. I'm assuming they're still up, Zev. You'll have to update me on that. And gazing at the Stratocaster Jimi Hendrix used on Electric Ladyland. I'm a huge Jimi Hendrix fan, so I might, sorry, Zev, I might opt for Seattle. Tom, sorry about this. Tom, what would you choose?
Well, let me ask you this. Can I take the Stratocaster to Culver City? Because I really like the weather in Culver City, but I think I'm with Charles. I got to go with the Hendrix guitar.
Yes.
Anyway, speaking of sound stages, Zev, I went to your LinkedIn page and was kind of surprised to see that among your groups you've joined are Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, until it dawned on me that what Zev might be doing is subtly drawing attention to the days of Hollywood, the studio system in Hollywood, when top actresses were bigger draws than their counterparts, the male stars, which meant female-centric movies, higher pay, and some degree of power in deciding roles. I'm assuming this is the implicit message you're trying to send, Zev, or am I reading too much into this?
I love it. You're like Sherlock Holmes. I don't. I used to work at Fox, so I worked in the labor relations group at 20th Century Fox in LA, and I've done a substantial amount of consulting and analytics work in the entertainment industry. So it's one of the industries that's near and dear to my heart. And I probably haven't updated that LinkedIn page what I'm following maybe 10 years. So yeah, that's the real reason you got that on there.
Yeah, we were desperately trying to connect the dots.
Yeah.
On your site, actually, and on your respective LinkedIn page, you talk about applying data science to reducing attrition, improving engagement. It appears your main focus is on addressing the gender pay gap. Is this because, in your view, most of these other issues stem from this disparity and the first order of business is closing this gap?
We do believe that. And it's a great observation from your perspective, because if you're not paying people fairly, that's where everything starts, in our opinion. So if you look at companies who are spending billions of dollars on employee engagement software, for example, and they're looking at surveying employees on their relationship with their manager, their cubicle, do they like their office? Is the coffee good? All of these different things that play into, do you have a great working environment? And they're not looking at one of the most important things in our mind, which is, are you paying people fairly for similar work? So to us, it's the tip of the spear. It's the very first thing. And from there, we can get into other elements that impact productivity and employee engagement.
Yeah, you think about any job you've ever had, right? And you do one of those engagement surveys like Maria's talking about, and you say, oh yeah, I like the 401k, I like the pool table, I like the benefits, everything's nice here, And then the next day someone taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, just FYI, the people of the opposite gender at your company who are doing the same job you are paid 20, 30% more than you. How do you feel about all the questions you just answered on that engagement survey? Everything kind of goes out the window for most people. And it's, like burn the place down. Like no one wants to work at a place where they're treated unfairly. And note that comparison is internal. It's not even relative to market. So while there is a lot of focus on, attention paid, which makes sense, the paying people market, what is market? How much should someone get paid to market? Pay equity as an internal comparison point and that fairness lever is so critical. It really is, as Maria said, like the tip of the iceberg, tip of the spear to get people on the right track for almost all other decisions made in the organization.
When asked, more people say that they favor equal pay for equal work, meaning that employees doing the same job should be given equal pay. That response seems right, but can overlook factors such as education, credentials, tenure on the job, past employment experience, performance ratings, for example. Now, there's two basic approaches to employee pay. You got pay equity, or we're paying employees fairly and consistently without discrimination on the basis of gender, race, other protected categories, but taking into account job-related factors such as education, work experience, tenure. And then you got pay parity, which requires that employers show there's no pay gap across the entire workforce between men and women and between whites and racial or ethnic minorities. Is there one approach that when you favor one over the other, or one that in your view is more valid? And why is this? I'll let you both answer this. Zev, if you'd like to go first.
The method, so it's interesting, right? Like, there's a lot of reasons why you might think that pay equity is something that people agree with, but then, in practice, there's a lot more devilish detail here. And I think that having technology, our real mission, our goal is to empower organizations to get this right using technology and using data science and doing it right. I think I'll let Maria answer more, but I feel like there's a lot here that seems simple at the surface level, and people, when you see a lot of popular discussion of pay equity, it's a very kind of surface level discussion of that. And then once you get into how it's done and how it needs to be done properly, there's a lot more kind of devilish detail there.
Thanks, Zev. Yeah, you're speaking to all the right things. You're talking about controls, and there's a real interesting dialogue happening right now, specifically around women. And you've probably heard of the motherhood penalty. You've probably heard of different things that apply to explaining why the gender pay gap exists. There's still a lot of dialogue around the fact that, well, this is because of the choices that women make. There's actually, I don't know if you've read it, but there's a great piece by Claire Kane Miller. I think it came out a couple of years ago, on a Cornell study, that as women enter different fields of work, the pay actually drops. So her hypothesis was that we actually value women's work less. Nobody's choosing to have lower pay for the same job that someone else is doing. It's patronizing, and it's often wrong. So this whole thing about, well, it's women's choices, they make the choice, they choose to step out of the workforce. It's still substantially similar work. Are you getting paid for the same work as someone else and getting paid fairly?
Yeah, that really is a good point. And as you know, there are just so many myths, that try to explain this disparity, what you're talking about. Yeah, well, women must be paid less because they have less experience. Must be women because women don't ask for raises. Maybe women are paid less because of the kinds of jobs they take. We hear all of these myths. But as a data-driven organization, you obviously go where the data leads you. So the question I have, can you cite anything that the data reveal that shattered, not a myth per se, but a common perception? Or put another way, have any of your findings challenged either of your preconceived ideas of what's at the root
I have
of
to
this
say,
issue?
one thing that I think should be kind of top of the marquee above that conversation about like what the data show about these kinds of explanatory factors or controls that Maria mentioned, how, time in the job or location or things like that. We can talk about that. But one thing that I think is really important before you even get into that is the fact that sometimes these things distract from the conversation in an interesting way. So the idea of how big is the gap overall, whether these things explain or not, is a little bit distracting from the question of whether there should or shouldn't be pay equity. And sometimes the conversations get conflated or confused, right? Like we don't, if I said to you, hey, the murder rate in New York City dropped and it went down to 0%, or we can explain some of the reasons why the murder rate went down, the response shouldn't be, well, okay, now we don't have a need for laws that say murder is illegal, right? Yet sometimes with pay equity, we see these things conflated of this idea of like, well, what are the explanations, and linking that to the question of whether we need to have or should have laws that protect pay equity, right? So even if it's the case that women don't negotiate as much, like there's a line of research by Babcock and Leshever that's particularly good that empirically demonstrates that women are not as likely to negotiate as often or for as much or as aggressively. I don't think people should need to be able to be good negotiators or great negotiators in order to get things to which they're legally entitled. For instance, we don't require people to be good negotiators to negotiate for minimum wage, right? Whether you're a good or bad negotiator, you get certain protections under the law. And, we don't change the laws whether the rates of compliance go up or down. So that's sort of I'll let Maria answer the rest, but I really feel like that's a top of the marquee consideration that I just want to put out there.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, you asked about things that are surprising. So as we work with our customers and we're able to dig in and look at using our tool, the underlying behaviors that are driving the pay gap, if they have one, I think there's some interesting things that reveal themselves. For example, we see a lot that companies may have nailed starting pay. And as we all know, starting pay is the most important indicator to pay over time. So if you get that wrong, forget it, you're in trouble. But even in companies that have nailed starting pay, you see a trend. And again, anecdotally amongst the customers that I've seen looking at their data, where women, if they're staying in tenure, so they're staying at the company for a long time, even if they nailed starting pay, but then that company is hiring from the outside and maybe hiring disproportionately male from the outside at quote market rates, but not giving additional compensation to women who tend to stay longer, that creates a gap amongst people doing similar work. And so it's stuff like that when you're able to start using data to dig into the behaviors that are underlying the problem, that you can start to see where we can make some changes.
Our guests are Maria Colacorcio and Zev Eigen of Syndio. Maria is the CEO, Zev, Syndio's founder and chief science officer. The Pew Research Center analysis of median hourly earnings of full and part-time workers in the U.S. found that in 2017, women earned 82% of what men earned. However, also according to this survey, 37% of men surveyed say there is no such thing as a gender pay gap compared to 20% of women. To what extent has your work raised awareness among men that this issue exists? And to what extent does it register that it's a real problem, one that has profound ramifications on company culture, engagement, recruiting, and retaining top people?
I'll take the first part, and thanks for the question. I think that is our intent. We want to raise awareness and help companies figure out how to solve this problem. That's the thing about the gender pay gap, the pay gap that's happening for both gender and race is that it's solvable. It's 100% solvable. And now we have the technology to solve it, and we can solve it now. So the fact that it still exists is crazy. And the fact that they're predicting it's going to take another 20 decades to solve it is also crazy. And I think the thing that you're saying is there's a lot of, when you spoke to the percentage of people that don't believe it exists, a lot of that is because you also see these studies that are saying women's choices count for 91% of the pay gap. Let's take that at its worth, even if it's true. So you can explain 91% of the gap based on choices. That still leaves 9%. So are you telling me then that it's okay that I'm paid 9% less just simply based on the fact that I'm female?
I think too. I mean, that's 100% right. And I think that my answer kind of to the last question applies here too, right? Like whether the rates are what they are, or they're higher or lower is somewhat irrelevant. I think the laws are what they should be, and people should be protected. And I think that whether you agree or disagree with that at any organization, you still have to look to see whether you have an issue. And, whether the rates are high or low or explainable or unexplainable, we see a lot of variation in the data when we help employers and look at their data, right? And there's variation across industries too. And in certain industries, like the tech industry in particular, where there have been some high profile suits on pay equity, not all industries are the same. If you're in an industry like the tech industry where there have been those kind of lawsuits, it's really hard to hire and recruit top talent, diverse and female talent, if you're not paying people equitably. Why would you come work at a place where it's going to be a problem from the start, and you're going to get paid less than your male counterparts? So companies that figure that out aren't just thinking about the negative or the fear kind of things, but they're also thinking about the positive value associated with getting this right. So turning it into something that can be leveraged to improve culture, to hire better, to retain top talent.
One last question. Again, thanks so much for giving us your time this morning. Can you refer to anything interesting that some of your clients are doing with some of this data as far as awareness and improving engagement? What exactly are they doing once they have this data and it reveals this, that, or the other?
It's really interesting if you look at the evolution of this. Pay equity, I think, still is for a lot of companies, but not as much so. This thing that's shrouded in privilege and fear and confidentiality. And we're seeing more and more of our customers come to us proactively and say, we want to talk about this. This is something, number one, we're proud of. Number two, we may not have it perfect just yet, but we want our employees to know that we're committed to it. We care about it, and we want to fix it, solve it, and stay on top of it. So, for example, we've had a couple of customers. Match Group is a great example. Mandy Ginsburg went live on the stage at Business Insider in New York and just said, we're looking at this, and we're looking at it in an ongoing way. And the executive leadership at the C-suite and at the board of director level is committed to doing this in a consistent fashion, not just one and done and putting it on a shelf, but as our business evolves, looking at this as we hire and fire and do acquisitions and have layoffs, and consistently looking at where we stand. And the reason we see companies doing this is because they want the trust of their employees, and they want to retain employees, sure. But I also believe the intention is really good here and noble, and they want people to know that they're doing the right thing by them, and they want them to feel valued and appreciated, and that they're being valued and compensated for the work that they do. So we're definitely seeing the trend go in that direction from, we want to talk about this at an all hands or an internal town hall, and now even more so, we want to talk about it in the public domain.
Syndio is a leader enabling modern organizations to harness the power of data to solve the most challenging business problems, like closing the gender gap, reducing costly unwanted attrition, and improving true engagement and collaboration. Our guests today have been Maria Colacrucio, the CEO, and she spoke to us from Seattle, and Zev Eigen, founder and chief science officer of Syndio, and he spoke with us today from Culver City, California. Maria, Zev, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
You're listening to Work in Progress with Tom Alexander and Charles Epstein.
Dr. Louis Klarevas is a research professor at Teachers College, Columbia University, and the author of Rampage Nation, Securing America from Mass Shootings. He has also held the positions of Defense Analysis Research Fellow at the London School of Economics and Political Science and as United States Senior Fulbright Scholar in Securities at the University of Macedonia. A noted authority on mass casualty violence, he has served as an expert witness in cases involving mass shootings and firearm laws, as well as a consultant to the federal government on security and counter-terrorism issues. And he joins us right now on Work in Progress. Louis, welcome.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you, and please say hello to my partner, Charles Epstein.
Hey, Charles. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well, Lou. Thanks for joining us. Perhaps because my parents were both teachers, but I've always fantasized about being a professor at some small Midwestern college, teaching American teenagers how to read Norman Mailer, John Updike, and David Foster Wallace. It always seemed, for lack of a better word, idyllic. But I know that's not the case, as I'm reminded of the famous line, the politics of the university are so intense because the stakes are so low. I'd like to give you the opportunity to disabuse me of the romantic notions I've always had of the academy without putting you on the spot, Lou. Are there tales of duplicity, mendacity, and all-out mortal combat that you've either experienced or witnessed over the course of your academic career that you're willing to share?
Yeah, academic life. You know that show Game of Thrones? They have
Sure.
nothing on academic life. No, that's not true at all. I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you, Charles, because I'm sure there are tales and stories like that. Maybe not of people riding in dragons for department meetings, and torching the place, and to be quite honest, there have even been a couple of shooting rampages that have involved faculty disputes. Kind of tie it into my book.
Oh, this is Lou, this is a Venn diagram alert. Go ahead.
Yeah, but to look at the bigger, wider circle in that Venn diagram, my experience has been pretty much nothing short of that romantic ideal. It's funny because if you ask me why I joined academia, maybe you won't get a romantic answer, but over the course of the last 2 decades, as while I've taught at the university level, I'm able to look back now at those 20 years and say I've been extremely fortunate to have a wonderful and rewarding experience being an academic. And it's not like, it's not the joking things like, oh, I get my summers off and I don't have to be at work every day at 9 o'clock or something like that. I mean, for some people that might be the case, but for me, what's been really rewarding is just, in a way, kind of being a molder of minds. And perhaps that the ultimate reward comes when you see your students go on to be quite successful in their own, professional and career endeavors. That, for me, is one of the greatest rewards, when I know that my students have gone on to do the things that, they dreamt of doing and that they were able to do it, successfully, and to know that I had some part in that. That is indeed a romantic ideal, but it's one that materializes quite frequently in my line of work. And I'm really grateful for that. That's the teaching side. By the way, the other side of this is, of course, the research side. And I know that Tom mentioned my book. One of the things that I also really enjoy and what I'm doing currently as a research professor is, as the title implies, research. And there are issues that are really important to me that I think deserve further study. And then if we are able to take away lessons from those studies that we undertake, and we take those lessons and then we apply them to the real world and try to make the world a better place, that too is also a very rewarding experience.
Yeah. Two quick things, Lou. Anytime I hear an educator refer to molding of minds, I'm afraid my immediate thought is of Jack Black and School of Rock. But apart from that, second, yes, you did sort of crush my romantic notions. And guys, if you listen carefully, that sound you hear is not our depleting stocks of helium diminishing, but the sound of my soul leaving my body. So thanks, Lou.
Always happy to disappoint.
Well, you touched on something. You talked about, what you'd seen after your students go on. And speaking of teaching, one of my son's friends, first year of grad school and looking to become an engineering professor. Brilliant guy, and had his choice: Caltech, MIT, Stanford. He chose MIT. What advice would you give to someone like that going on to teach at a college level?
Now that's an on-the-spot question because you're asking me to kind of boil down 20 years of experience and life lessons.
Give us one takeaway that they can sort of ruminate on.
So everybody has their own philosophy about how to approach teaching, and what works for one person doesn't work for another. So maybe what I would say is teach to your strengths. That's something that I think you can apply to every single professor out there, and not just every professor, but every educator, whether you're, teaching at the university level or you're a teacher at, the elementary school level, or you're an instructor for, your particular place of business. If you are educating people, teach to your strengths. Teach to the things that you know best, that you understand best, and use the style that you're most comfortable with, that you think reaches students the best.
That's a good thought. Now, to the other side, or the other part of that Venn diagram, we'd like to speak a little bit about your book, Rampage Nation, Securing America from Mass Shootings. First, tell our listeners what it's about.
Yeah, so the book itself looks at this growing problem of gun massacres and mass shootings that are taking place in the United States. Give you some examples that, probably also come to your own mind. The Sandy Hook shooting, the Aurora Theater massacre in Colorado, more recently, the Parkland school shooting, or just as recently as a couple, in the last 2 weeks, the University of North Carolina Charlotte shooting and the shooting at the STEM school in Highlands Ranch, Colorado. These are all very traumatic experiences that seem to be occurring at a growing and alarming rate in the United States, with very dire consequences. And so I wanted to write a book that kind of took a look at, why are these horrific events occurring? Why are they increasing? What is leading to increased death tolls for these shootings? What can we do to kind of reduce the violence?
Have you seen any change from the time you wrote your book, and perhaps some of the things that you're addressing, and perhaps some of the things you're advocating for? Any change from then to today?
From the time a study comes out, you don't really expect things to turn around real fast. I have seen changes. They're not necessarily for the better. The changes I've seen is that, when I wrote I'll give you a really good example, and kind of talks a little bit about the authorship process. When I completed my book, it was due to go to the publisher. I want to say it was a Thursday or a Friday, and I just couldn't meet the deadline. And I remember I ticked off my publisher. I couldn't get it done. I was like, I needed an extra day or two. And at that point, when I had written my book, the deadliest shooting in the book was the Virginia Tech massacre that happened in 2007, which had claimed 32 lives. That weekend, where it would have gone to the publisher, I think on a Friday, that weekend, there was the shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, which then became the deadliest shooting, in modern American history. So I remember that, we had to go back and redo the book and rush it to adjust for the fact that happened. And the book came out, and there was like a little addendum acknowledging what happened in Orlando. Subsequent to that has now been pushed aside and is no longer the deadliest shooting in American history, in modern American history. It's now the Las Vegas strip shooting that happened in 2017.
Tom and I actually know people who live in Parkland. My sister and her family lives in Parkland. And as that thing was actually going down, my daughter, she was at the pharmacy right across the school. And she called me while this was going on. Dad, what should I do? I said, well, don't leave. Stay there. So these kids, everybody was very impressed with how they sort of came together. The whole community came together around this issue. And everybody looking at these kids, my goodness, They're our future. They're speaking with such a clarity and so on and so forth. And there seemed to be, at least at that point, some real optimism that things would get done. And again, I know this is a very short window, but just taking that into account, perhaps reading some tea leaves, are you optimistic?
Yeah, actually, I am. I'm glad you asked me the follow up and you brought up the Parkland students, because to give you the honest answer of what's happened in the last 2.5 years, it's been largely depressing. However, the best way I could put it is that it's something I say in my book, that, all social progress begins with political setback, right? And so the Parkland kids, I think, are really the start of something that's going to be bigger and greater in terms of how to address gun violence. The thing that we all have to understand is that change change doesn't come overnight. It never does. And certainly in sensitive, areas like this, it takes time. I'll give you a really good example. You can look at how, and this is again something I talk about in the book, you could look at how seatbelts became a national issue. And, we could talk about, James Dean dying and how that starts to build a conversation. It builds a national dialogue, but it takes time. In a way, these things are bookended by major events. And, on the other end of that bookend is, Jane Mansfield getting killed in a horrific car accident. Again, at that point, after there's been this discussion of seatbelts, that kind of now pushes it into the political arena. So first you have like a societal discussion, and then you have a political, decision-making approach. And it's the same thing with guns. One of the first, one of the major pieces of legislation in the United States is the 1968 Gun Control Act. The origins of that go back to violence that was happening in the early 1960s that culminated in the assassination of President Kennedy. President Kennedy getting shot was really one bookend. It wasn't until his brother Robert got shot in 1968 that law that had been, discussed and debated and been part of a societal dialogue, that law pretty much, got through Congress and became the law that it is now, which, limits who can buy guns in the United States and prohibits people like illegal immigrants or dishonorably charged veterans or domestic abusers or, felons from owning guns. So it takes time. And that's why I'm optimistic, because what I see coming out of Parkland is the start of that important national dialogue. And then, the only sad thing is, if I'm right, it's going to take probably another tragedy to kind of, close that bookend. And at the rate we're going, I mean, that can happen anytime, unfortunately.
We're speaking with Dr. Louis Klarevas, research professor at Teachers College, Columbia University, and the author of Rampage Nation, the book we're discussing, Rampage Nation, Securing America from Mass Shootings. Lou, full disclosure, obviously, you and I go back a long time together, back to the same hometown in Pennsylvania, and grew up together and played sports and all kinds of things. And I knew you from our youth and obviously knew you as a great student. But this area of expertise is unusual. My guess is it's not a decision one makes just out of the blue. I would imagine it would develop over time. How does one make himself an authority on an issue this important?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I said earlier, what's some, you asked me what's some good advice for a teacher, what's some good advice for a researcher. And it's also, research to your strengths and research to your interests and maybe research to your experiences. And it's funny because you mentioned growing up in Northeast Pennsylvania. Kind of one of the first experiences I had in this area was back in 1982. When there was, at that point, I believe it was the deadliest mass shooting in American history took place in my hometown of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania.
Yes.
I mean, it's one of those things where to this day, I vividly remember, watching police cars race by me, and I was wondering what's going on, and then that morning I had a football game, and I remember showing up, and my coach was, visibly distraught. And later on, he told us what had happened. And one of the people who was shot and killed was, one of his classmates from the high school that I would go on to attend. And, again, we don't realize it, but there's the degrees of separation are shrinking in terms of our connection to people who have been victimized by mass shootings. And even back then, one of those people who died, his brother ended up being my classmate. So it was one of those things where I was always cognizant of that phenomena. And it was always there in the back of my mind. But, the real thing that pushed me into this, it was the Virginia Tech shooting. And at that point, I was teaching at New York University in New York City, and I was teaching a graduate terrorism seminar. Kind of this light bulb went off when I came into class, and my students, all they wanted to talk about was that shooting, even though at that point, we didn't have any evidence that it was an act of terrorism. And it turned out that it wasn't an act of terrorism. But that's all my students wanted to talk about. And this light bulb went off, and I realized, this is what terrorists are going to do in the future. They're going to resort to firearms to perpetrate attacks in the United States. So that got me interested in the topic, and I started to research, firearms violence, as a mass casualty, as an act of mass casualty violence. And then Sandy Hook happened. And I don't think that, there's a parent in this country whose heart didn't break a little bit, that day when Sandy Hook happened. And that's when I knew inside me, I just knew I had to write a book about this topic.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great to reconnect with you again after some time. And I always enjoy reading your posts online. And thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Dr. Louis Klarevas is a research professor at Teachers College, Columbia University, and the author of Rampage Nation, Securing America from Mass Shootings.
This is Work in Progress. There's more in a moment.
And we're back on Work in Progress, along with my partner, Charles Epstein. My name is Tom Alexander, and Charles, very interesting guest.
Oh, yeah, it was fun talking with Maria and Zev about applying AI to things like pay equity. It just goes to show how many things AI could uncover, just the tip of the iceberg. And talking with Lou is also fascinating. His research methodology. We actually spoke a little bit about that off air, but also just the life of a professor. Unfortunately, he was not successful in disabusing me of my romantic notions. It sounded like the ivory tower, according to Lou, can be a very, very nice place to live and teach.
I've had the good fortune to know Lou a large part of my life, and a great guy. And he speaks the truth. I know that he is just really, really passionate about what he does. And hey, we should all be so lucky, right? It's great that he's had that experience in academia, and of course, a well-respected author and thinker on all these kinds of historical and really important issues going on in the country today, as well as around the world. I mean, he won't tell you this, but he's also an expert on not only Greek history, but Balkan history. And he's a go-to on that for a lot of people as well. So just a really, really bright guy and a great guy that I've had, like I said, the good fortune to know many years.
I do want to mention to our listeners who have probably been kind of tracking this, Tom, Lou, several shows ago, I think, in fact, our second show with John Zizimos, really got a Greek mafia thing going on, although, of course, In Steve's case, he's an honorary Greek mafioso based in Athens.
Yeah.
But I just want one last thing about Lou. We didn't have a chance to ask him. I was kind of curious about this. Maybe we'll have him on another time, or maybe when he comes down to visit, we'll go out and talk about it. But I was talking to a friend about this years ago. Just finished his first semester at Harvard. He was telling me about all these famous name brand professors. He said, they're all obviously brilliant, but not all of them are very good teachers. So, I'm just wondering, with some of the pressures to advance in academia, writing, publishing, making presentations at these symposia and academic forums and the like, it takes so much of your time. You really don't have, it seems to me, a lot of time to practice and develop, your teaching chops. That just sort of, I guess, happens. And I don't think at that level anybody comes in to take your measure as a teacher and give you tips, on when exactly to throw in the pop quiz.
Right, that's right. Well, on that note, we'll say goodbye until next time. For Charles Epstein, I'm Tom Alexander. This is Work in Progress. We thank you so much for listening, and see you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.
This has been Work in Progress, a World at Work podcast about work, life, and everything in between, with award-winning radio host Tom Alexander and WorkSpan's Not Safe for Work columnist Charles Epstein. For more, visit worldatwork.org/work-in-progress. That's worldatwork.org/work-in-progress. Join us next week for another edition of Work in Progress.